Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. As usual, I'm Sajid Hussain and you are live with me over the Facebook. Today we have selected a very important topic, developing a research proposal. So this topic is very important for all those individuals, for researchers, for students, for professionals who are planning to start their PhD or any research degree. So to support this session, I have with me Omer Mushtaq from Lahore. He's a research associate at University of Management and Technology. Thank you, Omer. Thank you for joining in today.
Thank you so much, Sajid. Hello, everyone.
Okay, I have two distinguished guests with me, and they will be talking all about the research proposal. What are the key elements of research proposal? Okay, and what sort of the structure? What is the basically you can say the layout or the structure of a research proposal, and what can be some of the different challenges the student face while preparing the research proposal. So let me give you a brief introduction about my guest. I have with me Ahmad Abbas, who's a research scholar and business lecturer over here in the UK. Thank you, Ahmad. Thank you for joining in today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
And I have with me Dr. Waqar Abbasi. If we talk about the research, he's very brilliant, very expert researcher, business lecturer, and he's also, you can say, managing a dissertation and supervising dissertation for the last many years. Thank you, Waqar. Thank you for joining in today.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, formally, I would start with Dr. Waqar. If we talk about from the student perspective, many students basically feel, you can say, they struggle how to prepare a research proposal. So if you can please kindly guide us, what is the basic layout or the structure of a research proposal? And then finally, we can move one by one.
Right. So before we get into the layout and the structure, I want to talk a little bit about what is the purpose of writing a research proposal, because a lot of the times it's the same as when you think about, say, a business proposal, or when people are writing a business plan. Anytime you have to put something down on paper, the question that arises is, who needs to see this? Who is going to see it? Because if you're already self-sufficient, for example, in business, if you already have the money to start the business, you don't write a business plan, right? Because you don't need to prove anything to anyone. You already have all the resources that you need to put that plan into action. So it's fine to just have it in your head. You don't have to write it down. Now, when do you write a business plan is when you need somebody to invest money into your business, right? So that kind of thinking is transferable into why people have to write research proposals. If it is just research that you're doing on your own, or it is a pre-approved research project of which you're going to be a part, then there's no need to write a research proposal. But say you're looking for funding for your research from a funding council or the government or any private organization that wants you to carry out a research, or you are looking for an admission, which is what we are mainly focusing on today, I believe, is if you want to get admission in a research degree, then you have to consider who the reader is going to be. Now, a lot of the times, we are never thinking about the caliber of the person who's going to read it. When you're writing something, the only caliber that you really consider is that of yourself and maybe your classmates. And that's the perspective you take. But what people don't realize is that it's going to be a much more qualified, much more seasoned, and even maybe older person who's going to read it, right? So you as somebody with less experience, lower skill level, are writing a proposal that is going to be scrutinized by somebody who has more experience than you, who has more knowledge of research in that particular area, and to put it bluntly, who knows if somebody is just trying to make something up. So if you're writing a proposal and you're approaching it as an assignment, that doesn't work, right? And a lot of the times people, when they're writing assignments, you just need a pass. You need to pass or you need to get a decent grade to just get through. But when you're writing a proposal, it's about getting an admission. So the caliber of a proposal, I'm coming at it the long way around, but I needed to lay out all the players on the board. The caliber of a proposal has to be much, much higher than the caliber of an assignment, because it's not just about passing. It is about a perfect document that when someone reads, it gives them enough confidence that you will be able to complete that research on your own with their supervision. Okay? So when you're writing a research proposal, you are looking for quality. Okay, now coming back to what you actually asked me is, what is the structure of a research proposal? It doesn't matter.
Sorry for interruption. Basically, was like, some of the students, when they did the graduation or the postgraduate, like the degrees they have completed, so might be mentally they are still over there, like they will come in the class, they will see the teacher, they will see number of the student like fellow in the classroom. So might be that is the different criteria, different mentality. When it comes to the research, of course, they have to be independent. They need to put more information from their own side. Might be they will have only one supervisor throughout their 3 or 4 year journey. So, the overall, you can say the standard structure of a research proposal, and then finally, of course, we will be talking individually how to design, how to select a good research title, what are the key words, that key basically criteria, what things should be in the research title. So that we go one by one, especially from the very basic level for those students who actually don't know anything about the research proposal, or for example they are struggling. So the plan is basically we go from the very basic level on each of the key element of a research proposal.
Okay, so when you put it that way, we're talking about, is there a standard approach? Is there a standard outline for a research proposal?
Yeah.
Let me tell you that a lot of universities in this year, in 2020, are actually removing any structure or outline from their documentation. They don't want to give you a structure. What they want is for you to come up with a structure based on what topic it is that you're trying to research, right? Okay. So whereas 5 years ago, if you applied for a PhD, you download the document prospectus and all the application forms, somewhere in there used to be an outline, 1-page outline of a research proposal. So if we were to generalize, it's like any other report. You start with an introduction, you get into a literature review, you get into the methodology of it, and then you discuss the likely findings and contributions. So if you were to generalize, it is still that same thing. But the reason universities are not giving you that outline anymore is because they try to gauge your creativity. How are you going to lay it out without any assistance? Okay, so when do you need a research proposal? Like I said, I've already explained when you need it, right? When you're trying to get an admission or trying to get research funding, okay? Or you're applying for a postdoctorate research, so which is kind of like a job. How you're going to create it, like I said, it depends on the actual subject matter, right? We will go through it. We'll go through the methodology, talk about everything. We talk about literature review, how it's done, what are the key elements, etc. But let's talk about, first of all, the various levels at which you need to produce it. So you need a research proposal from academic perspective. The earliest you might need one is if you're taking research methods as a module, right? If you're studying your undergraduate degree, and within that degree there is a module called research methods, then the assessment for that module will be a research proposal. Secondly, if you're entering the final year of your undergraduate degree and you are entering a module, which is dissertation, it can be called a capstone project, can be called a dissertation, management project, research project, whatever it's called, you might need a proposal in the first 2 or 3 weeks, first 4 weeks of that module. After that, if you're doing your master's degree, whether it's an MSc, an MA, or an MBA, you're going to have a dissertation module as well in the final semester or the final year. Usually it's broken down into 2 semesters because they give you a dissertation as a year-long module in the UK.
Okay.
So that's a postgraduate research proposal. And thirdly, you might need it if you're entering into a PhD. So that is a doctorate level research proposal. Now, most of the universities in the UK, they get you started out as an MPhil student, and at some point you transfer over from MPhil to a PhD. So this is the PhD program, which is 36 months, is generally the first 18 months you're at MPhil level, and then the second 18 months, if you successfully transfer, then you're doing the PhD itself. All right. So 3 levels: undergraduate as an assignment, undergraduate as an undergraduate research, master's level as a dissertation, and also, by the way, there are master's degrees that are completely by research, so MSc by research, in which case there are no other modules, it's just a research that you carry out. And then finally, at PhD level. And at postdoctorate level, you don't really go for a proposal, you just use your thesis to sort of demonstrate that this is going to have some recommendations of future research, so that gets you into a postdoctorate program. Okay, so when it comes to the structure, the basic structure that I told you about, that is throughout in business and management studies. What is it? It's an introduction, and in your introduction, you're going to give a brief background of what the research is going to be about, what is the topic. You give a rationale for that research. If it involves an organization, you give a rationale of why this organization needs this research. Generally speaking, you do aims and objectives, right? But like I said, aims and objectives have to be very, very specific, very, very clear, because somebody who's reading it is not going to be a student. That's going to be somebody with a lot of experience, much more experienced than yourself. And then in the introduction, you kind of give, generally speaking, you give a timeline or a schedule for your research, how long it's going to take. It's a good approach to show it visually, like these are the stages, so you can make a flow chart, you can make some sort of a diagram to show how that research is going to play out. All right. So that usually is the first chapter. And now in the second chapter, usually you do a little bit of a literature review. Now the approaches to literature review really depend on which area you're researching. If it is something like business and management, which can be marketing, it can be finance, it can be any of the branches of business management studies. Generally speaking, you take one of 3 approaches to your literature review. Now the approaches are, you start very wide, and then you end narrow, so it's like a funnel approach, right? What that means is you start with a very broad sense of what your topic includes. If you're focusing in on something, you only focus in at the very end. But you start with a very broad discussion. So that gives you that kind of a diagram for like start broad and very narrow, pick one thing out of a whole lot of things. The second approach is the opposite approach. It is to start narrow and end broad. So you pick one very narrow topic, maybe just one type of marketing communication, say something like guerrilla marketing. Which is a very specific thing within the larger context of marketing communications. So if you're talking about guerrilla marketing, you start there and you open the topic up, you cover a much wider range. And then the third one, which is the best one in my opinion, is wide, then narrow, and then wide again. So it kind of gives you like an hourglass figure. So you start with a wider approach to the subject matter. From within that, you pick something narrow, and then with that narrow thing, you open that up again. And this gives you an opportunity to connect it with other fields of research. For example, if you start with marketing communications in general, focusing on one marketing communications channel or one marketing communications activity, and then you open that up, this gives you a chance to connect it with consumer psychology. It gives you a chance to connect it with finance. You can connect it with many other fields. So it becomes a cross field or cross discipline research, multidiscipline research, okay? And that's the best approach because it gives you the greater amount of information to deal with. So that's the three approaches to your literature review. Now, ideally, at the end of a literature review, you've identified some sort of a theory that can help you to identify the variables that will help you answer the questions that you're posing. So that theoretical, you can call it a theoretical framework, which is 1, 2, or 3 theories, or however many theories that help you to find the variables, and they explain the relationships of those variables that will help you to answer your research questions, or prove or disprove your research hypotheses if it is a quantitative bit of research. That is your theoretical framework. Do you know the theories that underpin, that govern the behavior of the variables that are involved in your research? But you need one more thing by the end of your literature review, which is called a conceptual framework. Okay, so theoretical framework, conceptual framework, there's a little bit of a debate, a little bit of confusion. Oftentimes students think it's the same thing. They think that, you know, it's a diagram of variables with hypotheses, with the arrows and everything. So you can call it a theoretical framework, call it a conceptual framework, it's the same thing. It isn't. So a theoretical framework is not a diagram, it's not a picture. It is a description of theories that underpin those variables and their behavior, that govern their behavior. The conceptual framework is the actual diagram of your independent and your dependent variables and the hypotheses that you are assuming in your research. So in a perfect world, you need both of those things. You need a theoretical framework to discuss the underlying theories of your variables, and then you need a conceptual framework. And in the conceptual framework, you can borrow it from previous research, which is fine at undergraduate level. It is even fine at master's MBA level. And it is even fine at MPhil level, I would say. But when it comes to PhD, you have to adapt. You cannot just take it exactly as somebody else's research has carried it out. You have to put in some effort from yourself, which means that your literature review should generate some variables that were previously not attached to a conceptual framework. Ideally, you do a whole new conceptual framework for your PhD. But the easiest way that you can do it is take some pre-existing conceptual framework, but add your own variables to bring it within the context of the time or the place or the organization which your research involves. To give you a very a brief example, there was a study that was carried out around sports marketing around 2009. And the research involved people carrying out a brand recall survey. So people who went to see a sporting event, they did a survey before they went to see the sporting event, and then they did a survey after they saw the sporting event. And the purpose of the research was to see how well people remember the brands that are sponsoring that event. Because, you know, sponsorship is a very expensive activity. It costs a lot of money. So they wanted to know if it is actually beneficial, like people remember the brands that sponsored. So that happened in 2009, and it was fine. The research showed that, yeah, there is some brand recall. People can correctly identify sponsors of a research. But then about 4 or 5 years down the line, 2013, 2014, there was 2012 Olympics. So there was all different kinds of research happening. Some fellow took that framework that same conceptual framework from 2009, but this time they added 2 or 3 more variables to it and actually got rid of one variable because they thought this is no longer relevant, but for my study, this is relevant. Why? Because the earlier one was carried out in the US and Canada, and the latter study was going to be carried out in Brazil, right? So we're talking about 2 changes. One, the time has changed, so there's 5 years in between, and 2, the geography has changed. So the first research was carried out in America, and the next research was going to be carried out in Brazil. So then they have to consider different variables, right? And this is what it takes at a PhD level. At the very least, you adapt, or the best case scenario is that you create your own conceptual framework. And then lastly, we're talking about the methodology. Now, methodology very directly is linked to how your questions are going to be answered. First of all, whether you're asking questions or whether you are going for hypothesis, right? Now, to start off the methodology, by the way, is there any questions at this point? Do you guys want to? Can you unmute yourself, Sajid, before you talk?
Sorry. Yeah, we do have a couple of questions, but it's entirely up to you. I mean, you can finish your part and then we can move to the question set.
Because if I get into methodology, it's going to take a lot of time to explain that. So if you have any questions about literature review and conceptual framework, then you can ask them now.
Yeah, after the research title, when we talk about literature review, of course, the students or the applicant, they have to do in-depth research, the resource that the information that is already over there, so they have to review that. Are these any sort of the universal resources for the researchers, for the PhD scholars, like some of the famous or known resources that they can go over? Let's suppose if we talk about Google Scholar, Google Books, or British Library, something like that. So these sort of some of the resources can be helpful for the
Okay, yeah, good question. So the resources wise, it depends on what access you have when you're writing your proposal. If you, at the time of writing your proposal, are a current enrolled student in a university in the UK, then your student ID, it opens a lot of resources for you. But if you've already completed your degree, you're kind of the student ID email address doesn't work anymore, then you're limited to public resources, right? So if you're currently not a student, then you're limited to Google Scholar, British Library. There's other sources on the internet to try and open up articles that are in published journals. This is why the best approach to any research proposal is to do it while you have those resources as a student. If you're a member of staff, then it's fine. You always have those that access. But if you're a current student, then yes, use your student ID, and the university, whichever you're a part of, it pays for a lot of subscriptions. And usually there is a database search engine that they provide for many universities in the UK. It is called EBSCO. There is also other things that they have, but Discover and EBSCO, those are the 2 things. So you go to EBSCO, it kind of compiles find research search results from all of the journals that the university has subscription to. The university pays for those subscriptions, and when you go to EBSCO, you search for something, it goes through all of those. But yeah, like I said, so the short answer is, if you're a private citizen, then you have to rely on public information that is available freely, because it's not realistic for an individual to pay for journal subscriptions. They're very expensive. But if you're a current student, then using your student ID, your virtual library, online resources that the university offers, that is all you ever need. Okay. The trouble with Google Scholar is that it will search very widely, but you won't be able to open every article that Google Scholar searches. So at best, you will only have access to the abstract of the article, because the full article is behind a subscription wall. Okay. But you can try your luck. You can find things if you look really hard on the internet. All right. So any other questions? You said you had a couple of questions.
Waqar, if you don't mind, I would like to have some input from Ahmad. I know, we will move to the research methodology. Definitely, we will have a detailed discussion on it. I just want to have a quick chat with Awais, because Awais, can you please also share some of your experience? You are also, of course, taking a research degree, and as a researcher, as a research associate or scholar. What are basically the challenges you feel like the students are facing while preparing their research proposal? And yes, when you started, also share your practical experience in relation to the topic and the proposal and the research that you are undertaking at the moment.
First of all, it's very important to have a very strong theoretical background when you are about to write your research proposal. As Dr. Waqar has pointed out some technical details, so he's pretty much right. But what I have seen and experienced, especially here in the UK, when students come here from our part of the world, that is Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Nepal, so students don't have much hold of theoretical foundations. They lack in their theoretical understanding. As Dr. Waqar, mentioned about the variables, that you have to use the theoretical variables in your framework, right, and to develop it. So I have seen that students struggle. For example, they don't know which theory is applied in which context, right, and how to use that theory. First of all, so their lack of awareness, and probably because of our obviously education systems in our part of the world, so this is one main hurdle. And then second thing I've noticed is their inability to do wider reading. Obviously what Waqar has explained a while earlier. It's about the reading articles, using the online databases, online library resources. So for that, they need to have that habit of reading articles, which I have seen, they lack. So they lack. Second, they don't get enough time. So it goes hand in hand, basically. So wider reading is another issue that I have identified. So when I came here, luckily I had a good theoretical understanding, of theories. So, but still, there is a complete difference of culture, in Pakistan, India, and our part of the world, and here in UK. Here I got to know how to use a library. In Pakistan, I didn't know how to use a library resource. I was unaware of it. So it's also a part of a culture. That we have to adjust into that frame of mind that, okay, now we have to use books and research articles, and we have to read it, and then we have to understand what that particular article is saying. So it's kind of a very complex and very difficult journey for international students in UK. Another thing what I've noticed is that students here, when they enter into this education system, they get influenced by each other a lot. Everyone has a different story, but for example, if there is a student who has to select a topic for his research proposal, what he will do is he will consult with his or her peers. Whatever they will suggest, they will go for it. They will not mind to research about it or read articles about that topic and develop their own understanding. This is where their fault, because as they enter into the research proposal phase, they have to interact with their supervisor, as Waqar mentioned earlier. Your tutor, your supervisor is much more knowledgeable and experienced. Then he asks you questions which you are unable to answer because you don't have prior knowledge, and you don't have the reason to take that topic just because your friend or your colleague or your peer said that, and you chose that topic. You yourself don't know why you are doing this topic. I often ask students here, okay, you are about to start your research proposal, so which area of specialization you want to go in? And they are mostly they don't have answer for this question, because they just want to do any kind of research, so they don't consider their prior interests, their background, theoretical background, their qualification, their previous experiences. They don't take into those considerations. Going into a research proposal, going into a research journey, it's very important to identify your own research interests, that what you like to research about, what you like to know about. So these are the challenges that I've identified, in the past 6-7 years that students often face here in the UK.
Thank you so much, Ahmad. Thank you for your contribution. We will definitely come back to you again. Yes, Waqar, we were talking about the research methodology, so please go ahead with your part.
Okay, yeah, before I get into that, I would like to address what Ahmad has said. It's very important. It's something that I personally lack the perspective on this because my entire education journey has been in the UK. So yes, he's very right about not knowing or not having that previous independent learning foundation. Okay. Because in the UK and in the US, to some extent, independent learning is a part of your education journey right from school. Okay. So even in school, they encourage you to go and read in libraries, to write essays, to write reports. This is something that doesn't exist in schools in Pakistan and most of Asia because your entire learning is happening from the textbook. And that textbook is the only book that you ever need to read in order to pass that module. But both those approaches, none of them is wrong or right. It's just a different approach, different paradigm in learning. But that independent learning, it kind of at some point you have to transition to that. Okay, I think it's very important, and I think currently they don't actually tell you this when you're coming from another country. So every university in the UK has some sort of a foundation course or some sort of a transition period between, like some of them, they just shove you right into a degree course without actually helping you shift that paradigm. But some good universities, they do actually spend some time. Again, these things are not mandatory, so students don't really go to them because their priorities are different and so on. But yes, that paradigm of guided learning to independent learning, you have to shift that at some point in order to then continue with your journey, because it's like here, you are in charge of your own learning. Especially in Pakistan, you also have your parents, right? So that is a very important resource in Pakistani students' life. The parents, they actually tell you, go sit down, study, and it is most of the time it is actually their hopes and dreams that you're trying to fulfill. But when you come here, there is no reason to get out of bed. There's nobody telling you to get out of bed in the morning. And I've actually seen this, a lot of my Pakistani students, they sleep right through to 1 o'clock, they wake up in the middle of the day because nobody is telling them. Maybe in Pakistan, their parents knock on their door and come and get them out of bed, but they have that independence here. But that is the wrong kind of independence. The right type of independence is taking charge of your own studies, giving yourself time to sit down and read. Which, like Awais said, it's very important to read. It's very important to have a sound theoretical foundation. And for any level of research, that theoretical foundation is actually created the levels below. So if you're talking about master's research, that theoretical foundation, the time to create it is during your bachelor's degree. If you're talking about PhD level, that theoretical foundation, the time to create that is during your master's degree. Okay. But also a lot of students, when they come here, they do jobs to sort of support themselves, so they lack time because the time that they have maybe towards a part-time job or something. But this is where the challenge exists. You just have to find time to read.
Thank you, Waqar. I'm not sure that there is some distortion in the communication. I would like to add up. We understand like there are some cultural differences, and of course between a UK and the South Asian country, there are some education practices as well where we can feel the difference as well. But I would like to say when the student from South Asian country, they come to here especially for the research degree, I think the main important role is for the supervisor as well, because he or she is taking the responsibility for that individual student. Okay, so I have basically you can say assessed and felt like there are many students who are not happy with the supervisor. Might be supervisor intensely busy, or I mean, there is a less support from their side. So what would you like to say on this, like how a supervisor can make effective contribution or progress to a researcher?
Right. First of all, your supervisor is not going to be expert in the very topic that you've chosen. They're not the expert. Guess who is the expert? It's you. You are the expert, because what we are saying about that independent reading and theoretical foundation, you bring that to the table, not your supervisor. The practical reality of supervision is that your supervisor will know very general things about research supervision.
All right.
And because they don't have one research student, they have maybe 6 research students, or even 9 or 10 research students. So what they need to develop is a generalized approach that helps them supervise all of their students. And I've seen this in terms of practical reality. Supervisors, they will hope that all of their students are at the very same level, so that the meetings that they're having with them, they can repeat the same information and all of those students will understand. But that's not reality from the student's perspective. Each student is doing something completely different. And within their research, those theories, that conceptual framework, it is your contribution. The supervisor doesn't know about these things. Supervisor knows about research. They know about methodologies. They know about timings of research. They know about research ethics. So they know about research itself as a subject, but they don't know about your topic. You know about your topic. All right? But that's not to say that they have 0 things to contribute. Maybe they read some article somewhere. Maybe they read they went to a conference, and in that conference, somebody was talking about something. So because they're in the same subject area, they will have a contribution to make towards the theory and the topic. But like I said, they're not the experts. They're experts in research. You are the expert of your subject, of your topic. All right. They would love for all of the students to ask the exact same questions, because that makes it like a classroom setting, which is what most teachers are comfortable with, is like teach all the students the same thing, and then they will all have the same questions in their mind, and then the answer that you have will help all of them. But in any given week, if you have 9 research students, all 9 of them are in completely different stages of their research. So as a supervisor, you're jumping back and forth. You're telling somebody about refining their topic. You're helping somebody else with doing some quantitative analysis, trying to fix SPSS or AMOS, or trying to figure out how NVivo works or something. And somebody else is at the very last stage of writing up, so you're helping them to write down their recommendations, contributions, etc. So every student is at a different stage, which creates challenges for the supervisor. So you shouldn't rely on your supervisor to know about your topic. That is your job.
Okay, thank you very much. I would just like to say to my audience or viewers, please leave your question in the comment section. Once we will have the conversation over, we will go individual question set and we will respond to you. We understand we have received some of the questions from our viewers. So definitely once my guest will finish their conversation, we will move to your questions. Yes, Waqar, I think Omer will have some question as well. So Omer, if you wanna move ahead now, it's entirely up to you, or let the Waqar finish the research methodology and the pending whatever the research proposal sections are, and after that we can go ahead with that.
Yeah, firstly, thank you so much, Dr. Waqar, for giving us such a detailed presentation about writing a research proposal. I have a question on the behalf of students. Some of the students here in Pakistan who may have written up their research proposal in very detail. They explain everything, but still they are confused. I don't know why their proposal they are not accepted for the PhD. So I have a question. So for PhD research proposal, how lengthy it should be and estimated how many words should be inside for the research proposal? Because maybe the reason is that so whatever the title they choose for the research proposal, maybe it's already working on there. So whenever they apply for the research, maybe that's the reason. Or sometimes the student in a research proposal they explains everything in a detail. So that's why it's my question. So how lengthy should be the proposal for PhD proposal?
Okay. Um, right. So, Omer, can you now mute your mic? Thank you. Right. So, this goes back to the question of somebody who's reading it being much more experienced than you. All right. You could have written from your own perspective a brilliant proposal, which you find it very nicely written, and you've made it very big with the word count, and you have 4 pages of references, which generally a lot of time people understand this is the measure of quality, is how many references, which isn't true, by the way. But then you don't get admission based on that proposal. And this is where that question arises. I thought this was a brilliant proposal, but then my admission application was rejected. Why that was the case? The first thing you can do is actually ask. They should tell you. They shouldn't just reject your application. They should tell you why. Right? Anytime a research degree admission application comes to a university, those proposals, they're sent to people within the research department who have spaces for more students to take on. So let's say, for example, in the University of Bedfordshire, there's a cap of any supervisor can have a maximum of 6 students. Say somebody has 3 students. So the research school wants them to take on 3 more students. So anytime that the research students make applications, they will take those proposals and send to somebody whose research area matches up with the proposal's topic. Now, when they're going through that, they're going to look for a few things. First of all, it's kind of like a CV for you as the applicant. So if you write it very clearly, use good English, it is well edited. What happens sometimes is called the halo effect. The halo effect is when you're not doing a great job, but you're making it look very nice, so people think that you're very competent, right? You wear nice clothes and you're always on time. Your shoes are shiny. People think that you're a good employee, which is not the case, right? You could be wearing scruffy clothes and dirty boots and still have a very good work ethic. But the halo effect comes into play. Sometimes you write a very beautiful proposal and people don't look past the beauty of it to see that it's actually a good research possibility. They just give you an admission based on how nice your proposal looks. But that doesn't happen all the time. It is just a matter of like rolling the dice. What happens most of the time is that they look at, one, like I said, it is a CV for you. So how good of a grasp you have of the things that you're talking about. Secondly, is the research novel? Is the research going to further the body of literature, further the body of knowledge pre-existing in the field? Now, it is very difficult to come up with new knowledge. When I was starting my PhD, my father asked me about what is a PhD all about. And I said, look, Dad, it's about coming up with new knowledge. So you read, and you come to a point where in a subject, there is no more knowledge. And then you find a way to extend that knowledge a little bit. And this is where a PhD lies. And it was like in layman's terms, but my father, he understood it very clearly, what a PhD is about. It's not just studying what is already there. It is about coming up with the new knowledge, extending that knowledge. This is where a lot of proposals fail. You're not giving us a possibility that that knowledge will be extended, that something new will be added to the literature. You might think that you are, but people who are gauging your topic, they decide that you won't be. Because one thing, it is already done somewhere, you didn't look for it, and you didn't find where it was done, but they know by them looking, and again, they have more resources than you. So when they look, they find more recent papers that have already done what you're trying to do. So they decide that the contribution is not going to be good enough to extend the knowledge, or they decide that you as a researcher will not be able to accomplish what you're proposing because they don't think that your skills, your knowledge, experience, they even look at what you've done previously. Have you worked? Have you done a research degree before? What have you done previously? All of that adds up, right? But the one thing, the best thing you can do if you get a refusal is to ask why you got that. Tell them to be very clear, because it is about your career, right? You want to go in that direction, so you want that feedback so that you can improve it and improve your chances next time you apply. So it's very important to ask, not just take a refusal as in a way that you think none of it was useful. Maybe you just need to do a little bit more work. Like I said, maybe you just add one or two more variables to it, make it a little bit more novel, create some possibility for new knowledge. So that's all it takes. Okay.
Thank you, Waqar. Yes, we were somewhere, I think, in the research methodology.
All right. So when it comes to so we talked about research literature review before, and literature review, we talked about how you have to come up with a theoretical framework and a conceptual framework, okay?
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to writing research methodology, you can have a very straightforward approach to it. There are a few things that you need to address, and the most important thing is to keep it very, very clear. Mm-hmm. And to not talk about things that you don't understand yourself. A lot of times people, they try to justify things and even they don't know what they mean. So they get caught out, okay? It affects the quality of what you're trying to say, and people can see that you're talking about something you don't understand. So first of all, it's very important. It's important to read books on research methodology. So this is a whole other literature review that you have to carry out. One literature review you have to carry out to investigate the topic, but you have to carry out another literature review, which we usually don't call it that, but it is a whole separate set of reading that you need to do to develop your methodology. And you will get no help on your topic from any books on research methodology, because they will not address your topic. They will address methodology in a general enough way so as to help everyone, help all the research students within that field. Okay, now, what do we have here? Research methods for business students. So yeah, I have one example here, which is Research Methods for Business Students by Thornhill, Saunders, and Lewis. Okay, now this is it's a good book on research, but I would say that it is as good as any other. They're all the same. They're all giving you the same information, okay? But if you want to increase your understanding on something more specific, like you want to know more about case study research, or you want to know more about qualitative research, you want to know more about interview research, then there are more specific books dealing with each different research strategy, okay? There are books on ethnography, there are books on all the other types of research. So this is why I said it is a whole other literature review that you have to carry out in order to understand the subject of research itself. They will not help you with your topic. They will just help you to reach the methodological approach that you need to answer the questions that your research is posing. So you start off with understanding the philosophy of research, which is something that is, it's very new to everyone because previously we don't cover it in anything. The first time you hear about it is when you're writing your proposal. And even sometimes you don't even know about it and you write a proposal and then it's not a good proposal. So the philosophy of research is it's a very wide, very broad subject. I don't think we can do it justice here, but Just to put it very briefly, you have to understand there are three things within the philosophy of research. We can call it the three tiers of research philosophy, or the three branches of it. There is ontology, there is epistemology, and there's axiology. Now, the ontology, it is defined as the nature of reality. What is reality made of? Now, it is a very grandiose thing to say, like, what is reality made of? But we're not talking about the whole world. We're just talking about your topic, right? So what is the reality of your topic? There are generally two approaches to it, which is objective and subjective reality. Objective reality means that it is the same for anyone who's looking. So we are all seeing the same picture. That is objectivism. And subjective reality means that the reality depends on the perception of who's looking. So everyone who looks sees something different, but for them, that is the reality of what they're perceiving. So ontology-wise, these are the two choices. Everyone has to make their choice of their ontological stance. Generally speaking, if you're heading towards a quantitative study, you would generally go through objectivism. And if you're heading towards a qualitative study, you would generally go through subjectivism. But that's the rule of thumb, but there are variations to it. There are exceptions to this. When it comes to epistemology, epistemology means how you're going to measure that reality. What is the measurement that you're going to use? So epistemologically, there are various approaches if you choose objectivism. So you have things like realism, positivism, etc. if you're an objectivist. You're an objectivist if you chose objectivism as your ontology. And if you chose subjectivism, then you have other similar choices, right? Interpretivism, pragmatism, etc. Okay? So based on these two, then axiology, usually people don't really consider axiology, but axiology deals with the, what do you call it, the aesthetics of your research. So is your research laid out in an aesthetically pleasing manner? Are your variables symmetrical? Is there symmetry? Is there beauty? In other words, is there beauty in your research? That is the field of axiology. I've seen a lot of proposals go through without dealing with axiology, and I've even seen many theses of successful graduates without dealing with axiology. So it is something that you can leave out, but it doesn't hurt to address it. Okay? Right, so once you've made your philosophical choices, then you talk about the approach you're going to take to your research. Okay? When it comes to your research approach, you have deductive and you have inductive, two approaches. There is never, well, there is abduction as well, but generally speaking, we only stick with one of either inductive or deductive research. Induction, to put it very brief, you know, in layman's terms, means that you're going to start without a theoretical assumption, and you're going to end with a theoretical assumption. So you start atheoretically and you end with a theory. So your research is dealing with generating that theory. Whereas deductive research means that you're starting with a theory and you're using that theory to then extract hypotheses, and your research ends when you prove or disprove those hypotheses. Okay? So induction is starting without a theory, ending at a theory, and deduction is the opposite, which is starting with a theory and then trying to prove the hypothesis, disprove the hypothesis. So those are inductive and deductive approaches. So that's the research approach. You do have to, it's kind of important to address the approach that you're going to take, because it helps you to build on your methodology and it leads you towards specific things down the line. For example, when it comes to your research strategy, then you have many choices. You have interviews, surveys, you have document analysis, archival research. Our friends in the law department, they do a thing which is called doctrinal research. And then there are many others, right? Observation is also a method of doing it. So your research strategy is governed by your research approach. If you take the deductive approach, then that might lead you towards a survey or an experiment. If you're taking an inductive approach, that might lead you towards document analysis, archival research, doctrinal research, or interviews, or other types of qualitative research. And then you can also consider the aspect of triangulation, which means that you can consider multiple strategies, in which case your research becomes mixed method. So if you're not doing one but two different research strategies, and then you're trying to triangulate them, saying that I will collect three types of data, three sets of data, and then my findings will become more enriched because of that. Other than that, there are things like time horizon. Are you going to do a longitudinal research? Longitudinal research is the example I gave earlier of the study they did before a sporting event and after the sporting event. This is an example of longitudinal research. So you do one round of data gathering before something happens, and you do another round of data gathering after something happens, and then your results are generated by comparing what changes occur between the pre-event and the post-event. And then you have cross-sectional time horizon, which always considers the contemporary time period. So if your research involves the here and the now, then you're doing cross-sectional research. And also in practical terms, it means that you will gather one data at one point in time, rather than gathering it twice or three times. Then you have to consider the actual data collection tool. What is it that you're going to use, the instrument of data collection? If you're doing quantitative research, then you have to develop some sort of a survey that becomes your data gathering instrument. If you're doing qualitative research, you still develop an interview agenda. If it's interviews, you still develop what do you call it? Just something like a plan of how you're going to carry out your research. What is your data gathering going to involve? Whether it's primary or secondary data, you still have to come up with some sort of an instrument. And then finally, you have to address things like your what do you call it? Sampling method. Okay. It is not just for primary research. Sampling has to be done for secondary research as well, how you're going to gather. There was a study recently that I was a part of, which involved people at, there's a charitable institute that helps people who are struggling with finding jobs. So it's like what you have Job Center here, but it's a private charitable organization. So they had pre-existing files on all of the people who they're trying to help. So when we did the research, we didn't have to do any new surveys because that information was already there. But we still had to do sampling. So we stratified, which is called stratified random sampling. We took all of their participants, likely people that they already have the data on them, but we stratified them. So we stratified them based on gender, we stratified them based on age groups, and then we stratified them based on their ethnicity, their ethnic background, okay? But when it comes to something like interviews, for example, your sampling has to address how big of a sample you're going to gather. This is very important, especially if you're writing a proposal. What size of sample are you going to say it is? It's simpler in quantitative research because you have things like a margin of error, a level of confidence. So if you figure out the whole population, then you can select a sample based on the level of confidence that you're going for. But when it's qualitative research, especially interviews, then you have to justify, okay, if you're going to do 10 or 12 or 24 interviews, why that many? Why not 26? Why not 27? The best approach there is to talk about something which is called saturation, which means that you will continue to gather your primary data until you perceive a point where no further information is being generated from the new interviews that you're doing. And this goes hand in hand with a thing called theoretical sampling, but it also works in opportunistic sampling or any other ways of just saying that I will interview someone when and where I can. And then I will go back and look at the data and decide when saturation has been achieved. So other than that, there's just the software that you're going to use if you're doing quantitative research that involves hypothesis testing. If you're going to try and develop structural equation modeling, then you have SPSS and AMOS, and you have other tools that you can use. If you're doing qualitative research involving interviews or secondary data that you need to analyze qualitatively, then there is a company in Australia called QSR, and they have this software called NVivo, which right now I think is in its 12th version right now. So you can get NVivo 12 through whichever university or college you're a part of. So that you can use for your qualitative research. But it's very important to mention in your proposal which software packages are going to help you to analyze the data that you gather. The only other thing that you have to address is research ethics, how you're going to protect the data, how you're going to keep people's sensitive information anonymous. Are you not going to breach any research ethics codes from the university? So you have to look at the university where you're applying to get a sense of what their ethics code is, and then you have to talk a little bit about how you're going to comply with that ethical code. All right, so that's everything about methodology, and I will let you guys ask any questions that you have before we move on.
Thank you very much, Waqar. Thank you for the comprehensive information and presentation overall on a research proposal. There are some of the common question, of course, I have in my mind. We have some from the viewers as well. How important it is, like when you choose a particular research approach, like we talk about inducive or deducive approach. So I have seen like some of the proposals are being rejected because they are taking the different approach. And when we talk about sampling and you can research strategy, that is not fully fitted with that. So on this one, and secondly, when the researcher chooses some sort of the topic, it's very hard to get the data from the you can say target audience or the you can say the target population, especially the respondent try to avoid give the information what is written on the question set. So is there any way like when we design a questionnaire, there are some of the questions that can be generic. I mean, when the respondent give the answer, they shouldn't feel any sort of the privacy issue.
Right. It is something that you will struggle with. There is no way to get around that struggle. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't give yourself an impossible task. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, especially in undergraduate level students, they choose a company, and then when you ask them, how are you going to get inside that company? Do you work for them? They say, no, oh, it's just a company that I like very much. And then my next question is, they're not going to let you through the door. Yeah. So how are you going to get those respondents? So you shouldn't give yourself an impossible population which you cannot reach. For instance, what if your research is about people that are extremely vulnerable and you don't have the right to ask them any questions? Or your research involves a country where right now there is war or terrorism, or there is a virus, for example, and then you cannot get to that population. So you shouldn't give yourself an impossible population. It should be something that you have access to. A lot of the times, and I really like it when this happens, is that people coming, for example, from Pakistan, their population is back in Pakistan, which is completely fine, right? So they say, okay, in Pakistan, I have access to this sample that I'm choosing. So when it comes time to gather my data, I will go back, I will gather that data and bring it here and then analyze it. All right. So that data gathering being done from somewhere you have more access, that is more reasonable, especially for international students. I've seen this from Pakistani students, Chinese students, Bangladeshi, Indian students, students from even Afghanistan, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Bahrain. So they go back to collect data where they have access, right? But then, of course, there are people who want to do something where the population is right here in the UK. And it doesn't matter. If it makes sense, then it's fine. We had a colleague, Ahmad Hussain, right? Sajid and I were familiar. I don't know if the other two people know Ahmad. But his research involved UK audiences, even though he came with an MPhil from Pakistan, and he did all of his previous research in Pakistan. When he came here, it didn't matter, right? It didn't matter to switch to the UK audiences. So he was able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you need to have access. And this is something like even your supervisor will not be able to get you that access. Forget about it. That's the supervisor is the last person who will get involved in this. But you have to make sure that you have access to that audience that you're selecting. And that can then help you with what your question was.
Thank you very much. Can we move to the question from our viewers, and then of course we will have the discussion after that. Amna has asked a very long question. Let me go through it. Can we include references from the recent conferences, like the OCD personnel has given some of the insight during panel discussion? Can that be included to support my research and show relationship in my theoretical framework? A lot of times people mix it with the diagrams, as you said. It's actually done in the conceptual framework. So it's for you, Dr. Waqar. She's just asking, like, some sort of the conferences, especially, can we include those conferences as our reference pointer?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. You cannot do it unless the conference proceedings are published. Mm-hmm. So if you attended a conference yesterday, you cannot do it because it's not published, right? It takes some time for conference proceedings to be published. So once they're published and they're accessible, then you can use those. So if, I don't know if this is a separate thing about what she's saying about the diagram, etc., or is it just part of one question? But anyways, yeah, the answer to that is you can, of course, reference conference proceedings, but not until they're published, okay? And then what she's saying about a lot of time people mix with the diagrams, as you said, it's actually done in the conceptual framework. Yeah, so conceptual framework is the diagram. Theoretical framework is just the description of the theories that are involved. So of course it can come from journal articles. It can come the same way. It can come from conference proceedings, but they have to be published.
Thank you very much, Waqar. Another question from Binti Answer. She's asking, like, if she want to have effective research proposal, especially during these days, COVID-19 and coronavirus. So you can say basically the face-to-face support is not available effectively, of course. So in this situation, how she can design effective proposal? And secondly, please give us more detail of the guidance on data collection and study design.
Okay. So if she's talking about e-commerce possibilities that exist because of COVID-19, that is something else. And accessing your participants in light of COVID-19, that is another issue. Mm-hmm. Now, it's commonsensical that in the coming months and years, there's going to be a lot of research related to COVID-19 in every field. No matter which field of study you're talking about, there's going to be a lot of research. If you're talking about e-business and e-commerce possibilities that exist because of COVID-19, it can be done in a very similar way that you would do any research, really. When it comes to the rationale for doing the research, which is something I discussed, you put it in chapter 1, research rationale, you can address COVID-19 as being one of the contributing factors that make the research important, valid, and timely. All right. So that is partly the answer. Secondly, if you're talking about accessing participants because of COVID-19 and social distancing, any proposal that you're writing today would be for a research that would be carried out maybe sometime in the January or September of 2021. You have to consider that by that time, this might be over. So you might no longer have to consider social distancing. If you think that your data gathering is going to be very, very soon and social distancing does affect it, for example, if you're a current student, you're already in your research degree and you're in the phase where you're gathering data, then you can incorporate things such as this very conference tool. You can incorporate over the phone, over, like whatever precautions you want to take. But you can also do it in physically, face-to-face. Just make sure that you're abiding by the social distancing. You have some sort of barrier in between. You're providing sanitization and all of those things. So it can still be done. You can do it online, or you can do it in person, just by complying with the social distancing.
Thank you, Waqar. We have another question from Amna. I think she's not happy. She's saying like qualitative research is discouraged over there in Pakistan, so can't we do it over here?
I've no idea why that is the case. I'm not involved in any research in Pakistan. If they are discouraging it, maybe it's because they don't know about it, right? So they don't have the expertise. And I know that in Pakistan, people are very good with quantitative statistics and data analysis. So they feel more comfortable. They've never done it themselves, so they're hesitant to supervise qualitative research. The thing about qualitative research is a lot of the times people think that it is not very high quality, it is not very exhaustive. But you have to consider the fact that qualitative research extends theory. Like I said, you can do inductive research, start atheoretically and come up with new theory. Qualitative research in that sense has a greater theoretical contribution. Quantitative research generates more practical contributions. Okay? But it might just be a question of people lacking the skill set to supervise a qualitative study. So you have to find somebody who has done qualitative research themselves, and they will be able to supervise you in your qualitative research. If you look at a professor or a lecturer, and you go through their research contributions, and they've never done a qualitative study, and you send that person a proposal for a qualitative study, they're going to reject it because they don't know how. So you have to find the right fit between your supervisor and your research. If they don't need to have done the research in that topic, but they do need to have done the type of research, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, they need to have that knowledge. Then they will not refuse it based on that.
Thank you very much. Another question from Harelga Ijaz. She's saying, like, as a new applicant, as a new researcher, how she can basically improve the chances that her proposal will be accepted on a first instance.
I think throughout we've been talking about how to improve the quality, right? But just to recap, make sure that you yourself have a very good understanding, so that when you're writing things down, you're writing from a very informed perspective, because like I said, the reader is much more experienced and qualified than you, so they will be able to see the weakness. Secondly, use the most up-to-date sources. Make sure that the research that you're proposing hasn't already been done. It extends the body of literature a little bit, gives some original contribution. Find the right type of university where that type of research is already underway. People are doing similar things, so it will fit within the larger body of research. Find the right supervisor who knows about the topic, who knows about the method that you're proposing. But yeah, the quality of the proposal is really about using good up-to-date sources. It's not about using many sources. You can have one page of reference. It doesn't need to have 5 pages, 10 pages. But they should be very relevant, recent, and they should come from good journals as well, good high-quality journals.
Dr. Waqar, when we talk about updated sources, what does it mean? Since how long we can go back?
Look, the going back part is not as important as how recent they are. Okay, you have to consider up to today how much research has been done. Now, going back, you will just keep seeing the same things over and over again. I'll give you an example. if you pick up a paper from, say, 2017, 2018, yeah, that paper will talk about everything that happened previously on that topic. And that will go back 1998, 2001, 2004, 2006. You will see that there. Now, what you need to do for a proposal is to make sure that after 2017, nothing else happened. When it's about going back, then they're already doing it for you. The guy who wrote in 2017 already went back as far as possible. You only go back further if you want to know more. Like I said, broad, narrow, broad. So when you're starting broad, you have to go back a little bit further. So in any scenario, you only go back just to check what they're saying is accurate and what was done previously. But it's more important to make sure that nothing happened after that study. Right?
Thank you.
The previous ones, they've already looked at it for you.
Thank you. Well explained. The question from Amna, I think she has already asked the question above. And yes, she is saying that the conference was online live and it's available.
No, conference proceedings need to be published. It's not about being able to watch the conference pre-recorded or whatever. When the proceedings are published, this is when you can give a reference. Okay? So you have to wait for that because there is a peer review process that happens before. The conference itself is not the publication. Proceedings are published and then you can use it.
Thank you. I think we have covered all the questions. Nothing is pending now at the moment. Omer, I leave the ground for you. If you have anything in your mind, please go ahead.
Yeah, everything is clear now. So sir has presented us in detail everything. So I don't think so any question is left now. Thank you so much for a detailed presentation. Thank you.
Okay, you're quite welcome. Sajid, anything else that you'd like to add?
Thank you so much, Dr. Waqar. Thank you for taking the time. It was a pleasure to have you. And obviously, in future, we will contact you again to have another session relevant to research so that it can be handy, it can be useful for our audience.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you very much.
To our viewers, thank you very much for joining and watching our live session. And of course, every week we will be bringing some sort of informative, interactive session for you guys. Next week, we are talking about investment in stock exchange. So we will be having a profound, very well expert doctor who will be talking about on the investment in the stock exchange, what can be different, you can say the risk factors, what element we need to see on. So please keep joining and we will see you on next Sunday on that one. And of course, the today topic was well explained by Dr. Waqar. Thank you so much. And yes, we will have a plan another in future as well. So at the moment, I think we have gone 1 hour 20 minutes. That's a very long session. So just we will wind up now. Please keep doing so. Thank you. So thank you very much, Dr. Waqar. Thank you, Omer, for joining in today. Take care of yourself and see you very soon again.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.